Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellency, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you back for the interactive discussion component of the morning. The topic that we've laid out is designed to serve as a follow-up to the excellent keynote address that we had this morning. The topic is human rights as an integral part of the process of globalization, the right to development as an inalienable human right. And what I'd like to do is I'll say a few words just to remind everyone who is here on the panel, and then I'm going to try to do this as interactive as possible. So I think I'll just ask one general opening question to the panelists to maybe get things going. Those panelists who would like to offer a few introductory words would be welcome. I think Dr. Franklyne, I'm going to pick on you again also, because I want you to get the discussion going. So maybe I'll ask you the question first. But before I do that, I'd like to actually give a warm welcome to a speaker who just arrived today, who will be giving a keynote address tomorrow. Professor Caitlin Malfile, if you can maybe just raise your hand so we know you are. She's a professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Louvain, and she's here with us all the way from Belgium. So welcome to the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, and we look forward to your lecture tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. And the other speakers, I think we've all had a chance to get to know. The ambassador of Burundi, I already introduced earlier this morning, Ambassador Bacanamwo, a good friend and a partner of the Institute. We're very happy to have you here for today, as well as it was, I think 3 weeks ago when we had you here with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So it's wonderful to have you back. The Honorable Madame Sonia Ndikumasabo, we had the chance to learn from in two ways this morning, her keynote address, as well as the interview. As you know, Vice President of the Independent National Commission for Human Rights of Burundi. In addition, I already pointed him out, Dr. Franklyne Ogbunwezeh, head of the Africa Department of the International Society for Human Rights, the second largest human rights organization after Amnesty International. Mr. Hassan, Shire, Sheikh, we also had the privilege of hearing from last night on the panel discussion, as well as some interactions earlier in the day. He's the coordinator of the East and Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project. And that's it. We also have a number of other special guests. Norma Wright, we all know. And so what I'd like to do, as I said, is really ask more of a general question, just to kind of get the ball going, because I'm sure you already have questions prepared for Sonia and the others. But just as a way of starting, and I thought, Franklyne, who better than you, after our charismatic engagements the last few days. So as you look at the title of this panel discussion, Human Rights as an Integral Part of the Process of Globalization, do you agree? Is human rights an integral part of the process of globalization, or are these two separate things that are kind of happening, not necessarily going hand in hand? And then to the second part, the right to development as an inalienable human right. Is that a human right, the right to development? Is this something that really everyone in the world should have access to? I mean, if we argue that the main problem in the world is actually access, in the sense we have enough money in the world, we have enough resources in the world, it's really this issue of access, which ideally local, national, and regional governments should be providing for us. Is it just an issue of access? Is this an inalienable human right? So Franklyne, if you could maybe begin offering a few words, I'll pass the microphone to you, and then the microphone is welcome for anyone on the panel or the audience.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everybody. This is really a two-pronged question that is quite pregnant with a lot of implications. First of all, let me start from below. Is the right to development a fundamental human right? If we look at the classical human rights that were defined by the United Nations in 1948, one may say, hey, come on, there was nowhere it was articulated or written in that everyone should have the right to development. But that is implied by all the statutes that were listed there. So I think it is a human right that everyone should have access. No country or no people should be subjugated not to develop at their own pace, according to the dictates of their environment and their own culture and laws. So I would think that the development is a human right. It's a fundamental human right because we are bound to develop. If a baby that is conceived in the womb develops until something stops it. So if something stops it, we call it an abortion. So if something stops the development of a people, it's an abortive process. And you could see a lot of groups of people agitating against that they have a lot of external influence in their society and development, and they wouldn't want that. The second question, is human rights an integral part of globalization? If you know the history of globalization, you will come to think that it has never been, but it should be. Talking from the African perspective, you could say, when did we start experiencing globalization? The first wave of globalization was when the Arabs came from across the Sahara, took slaves from sub-Saharan Africa and then to Arabia. And the second wave came with the colonial masters. They came from the sea, took slaves again to the United States and to the Caribbean. Okay, so for the African, we could say that this globalization process, there was no human rights involved. Because when you could sell a human being, does he have any rights? When a human being becomes a merchandise, an article of sale, for an African, this doesn't state that they came with human rights in mind. During the conquests, Pizarro was not going to teach the American Indians or the Mesoamericans about human rights. He was there for the resource, interest, which has been there in the beginning, still continuing. But what we are saying and what we are advocating is that human rights should be an integral part of the globalization process, because the human person is the subject of globalization. So he should not be treated merely as an object. And you objectify him when you make him a subordinate to the process. He should be there at the head of every other thing. Immanuel Kant put it well in his categorical imperative. The human being should not be used as a means to any end, because the human being is an end in himself. And that's why the topics you have read, human rights should be an integral part of the globalization process. If it is not that yet, we should try and make every effort to make sure that we include human rights. Everywhere we see the globalization process, we should give it a human face, because the human being is the subject of all things that we see in creation today. That's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franklyne. What I'd like to do now is actually give a special welcome to a German guest to really help us, I think, to complement the discussion, which has been very much Africa-focused up until now. And I'd like to give a special welcome to, again, someone I'm pleased to consider a close friend of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy and a partner, someone who has really been very, very dedicated, speaking on many occasions to groups of young leaders, also in the context of conferences, as well as giving us advice. In the sense there, I myself, as you know, am a foreigner here in Germany, so very often when it comes to questions also about Germany, whether it's recommendations for speakers or content. I've really been grateful to the very kind support of His Excellency Ambassador Dietrich von Kyaw. Ambassador von Kyaw is the former German ambassador to the European Union, and really a long time, let's say, lifelong dedicated diplomat in that sense. And I think really you've had a chance, on the inside to deal with these issues as a diplomat, as well as on the outside. I think now you have a little bit more openness since your official term and duty has passed to really give us some insights. What I appreciate about Ambassador von Kyaw, he tells it like it is. And in that sense, that's sometimes rare to find also with an ambassador. So I'm really very, very happy that you could join us today. And before I ask you an opening question, if we could all please give a very, very sincere welcome to Ambassador von Kyaw. Thank you. So Ambassador von Kyaw, it's a question that we actually haven't had a chance to discuss yet together in the context of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. And I'll pose the same question to you that I actually posed to Franklyne. If you think of the topic of this panel discussion, human rights as an integral part of the process of globalization, do you agree? Is human rights an integral part of the process of globalization? And then the second question, the second part of the topic, the right to development as an inalienable human right. Is that an inalienable human right, or is it a luxury? How would you respond to that? And I'll give you the microphone.
First of all, I'm very happy to be here again. I see African friends. I spent part of my career in Africa. I learned about scientific socialism a la africaine in the Congo Brazzaville. And then I learned about the difficulty of observing human rights from the right. Before in Congo it was from the left side. The difficulties from the right side were in Bangui with the famous Bokassa. So, okay. During my time with European policies, I negotiated frequently with African partners and friends in the ACP context, the various conventions, Yaoundé, Cotonou, etc., where Europe tried to promote inter alia also human rights in Africa, but mainly the development of Africa, and by making concrete financial contributions as well as trade concessions. As far as human rights is concerned, I'm trying to promote myself first. I was in the United Nations as a German delegate from 73 on 5 years. and 73 the two German states, in those days, Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, and the GDR joined. So this was quite a historic moment. And I became, in the history of the United Nations, that's why it's topical for today, the first German chairman of a main committee of the General Assembly. And this committee was the third dealing with social and issues and human rights issues. So it's a little bit outdated. It happened in the 70s, but I am also versed not only in European affairs, but also in human rights and in development policies, matters. Human rights has always, the promotion of human rights has always been on the international agenda, not only of the West, but of the United Nations. And in principle, everybody stood also in the past behind it. But we had inefficiencies, considerable inefficiencies. We had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it was not a binding legal document. Then we created two covenants, two pacts, the one on civil rights in the 70s, and the other on economic and social rights. The two were supposed to go together. But these conventions were binding for those who ratified them. But unfortunately, they had wonderful principles in paragraph 1, and in paragraph 2, all kinds of caveats of reservations, national policies, national laws, and what have you. So they never became very effective. We had the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. Now it's called Human Rights Council. I was a member for a couple of years for Germany in this Human Rights Commission. Well, we fought, we struggled. It was rather imperfect. And now we have globalization. And globalization, as far as I see it, means a revolution in communication instruments, breaking barriers, legal barriers, political barriers. Now, the time when states could cover up their violations of human rights nowadays are over, at least in all those countries which have computers, handies, iPads, work with Facebook, etc. So in a technologically more or less advanced country, like for instance China, it now has become quite difficult to cover up violations. Not yet already in North Korea, because it's underdeveloped technologically. But one day it will also happen even in North Korea, to take these two Asian examples, both representing extremes. So therefore, we now have a more positive development towards the observation of human rights. At least it can no longer be that easily covered up. What it all means, human rights, Western countries have different ideas than third world countries or Asian countries, but in any case, basic rights can no longer be that easily violated because of the globalization. And this I see as a main development, positive development. And the UN has taken that up. They have, a couple of years ago, they enacted this responsibility to protect resolution, which was for the first time applied in the case of Libya. It even gave an authority by the Security Council, thanks to the abstention of China and Russia, for NATO to intervene in Libya. It is a development unconceivable when I was in the United Nations in the 70s. Now, of course, in Syria, China and Russia have had a second thought. Nothing is happening, though the situation in Syria is much worse than it has ever been in Libya. So nothing is perfect, but at least you have these positive developments, and also Syria is, Assad is not capable of covering up what he's doing. Each killing in any of these cities is in an instant matter known all over the world. And this is a very important, almost protective development for the implementation of human rights. Now, I don't know whether I should continue and talk about development. Maybe later, I don't know. Okay. What do you expect me to do? Should I shut up?
Well, why don't let's take the moment the ambassador wanted to add something, so why don't we take the moment, we'll take turns and then we'll come back in a separate time to the issue of development, which is a key issue, but maybe in the second round. And we're going to have translation also for the ambassador who would like to say a few words in French. So first we will have it in French, and then we will have the English translation. Please, Your Excellency.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, je dois ajouter que la question des droits de l'homme et du développement ne date pas d'aujourd'hui. C'est une problématique séculaire. Vous savez que la question des droits de l'homme a été mise en avant depuis l'État moderne, quand on a parlé de la question de l'humanisme et de la Renaissance. C'était par opposition au Moyen-Âge, qui avait été une période obscure au niveau des droits de l'homme, parce que c'est l'époque où on avait assisté beaucoup à l'esclavage, à l'exploitation de l'homme par l'homme. Et à partir du XVIe siècle, on a commencé à mettre l'homme au centre de tout développement.
Okay, do we have a second microphone down now there? So, let's see.
So the question of human rights is an old question that appeared after the Middle Ages in the 16th century. Yes.
Could you repeat?
Yeah, the human rights issue is not a new issue. It dates back from the 16th century.
Je disais que la question des droits de l'homme a été déjà mise en avant au XVIe siècle, quand on a parlé de l'humanisme et de la Renaissance.
Yeah, at that moment, man was put in the center of interest, and so human rights became really important at that moment.
In the context of humanism and also the Renaissance. Yeah.
Et c'était par opposition à la période précédente, le Moyen-Âge, qui avait été une période très malheureuse pour l'homme, où l'homme a été mis en esclavage et il y avait l'exploitation de l'homme par l'homme.
Yeah, it was in opposition to Middle Ages when slavery was a big issue.
Et donc pour parler justement de la globalisation et de la question des droits de l'homme, je dois dire que quand on parle des questions des droits de l'homme, beaucoup de gens regardent l'Afrique ou l'Amérique latine, voire l'Asie.
So when we deal with human rights issue, a lot of people are only looking at Asia or Africa.
C'est vrai que dans ces continents, les droits de l'homme sont un peu en retard par rapport à ce qu'on connaît ici en Europe occidentale.
So it is true that human rights are more violated in these continents than Europe.
Justement, mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'ici en Europe occidentale, les droits de l'homme sont... qu'ils doivent donner des leçons à tout prix à ces autres continents.
It doesn't mean that Europe has the right to give their opinions about the violations that occur in these continents.
Vous savez qu'aujourd'hui, il y a une problématique à propos du tribunal international. Beaucoup d'observateurs pensent qu'il y a une injustice au niveau justement des droits de l'homme parce que ce sont certains leaders des pays qui sont appréhendés au niveau du tribunal, alors que c'est une question qui doit être globalisée aussi au niveau de l'Europe et des États-Unis, pourquoi pas.
The human rights issue should be globalized. It should be like a worldwide issue rather than a continental one.
Donc c'est une question qui doit être Je donner l'exemple du tribunal international qui devrait s'occuper des infractions commises par les autorités, bien sûr en Afrique, en Asie, en Amérique latine, mais aussi en Europe et aux États-Unis, si on doit parler de globalisation dans ce domaine.
So the International Tribunal, I don't know how to translate it in English.
International Penal Court.
Criminal
International
tribunal,
yeah, International Criminal Court in La Haye.
In The Hague?
Yeah, he's saying that actually there is a problem because countries esteem that some leaders of countries they are betrayed in the criminal court more than others. Instead of, for example, African leaders are more there than Europeans ones or Americans one. We don't see Americans leaders or president going in the International Penal Court. This is a debate which is now on the table. And we know that the International Criminal Court must be a global one for everyone, every leader, but we see some regions of the world going there more than others.
Et pour embrayer sur la question du développement, il n'y a pas effectivement de développement intégral s'il n'y a pas respect des droits de l'homme.
So, yeah, there is no full development, but it's not possible to have complete development if you don't have human rights.
Parce que qui dit développement, il faut parler de développement durable, intégral, et ça passe par le respect de l'homme dans toute sa nature, l'égalité des chances, l'égalité aussi des sexes, dans tous les domaines. Et sans cela, il n'y a pas de développement durable, intégral. Je vous remercie.
Yeah, in order to have full development, you need equality of chances, of sex, and human rights in all areas. So, yeah.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that statement. Would anyone else like to offer an introductory statement before we...
I just wanted to add something to...
Or go for it. And then eventually I want to give it to the participants.
Yeah, thank you. He made a very important point, and that point is when it comes to globalization and human rights. For instance, he made the point that I've been making that I didn't want to talk about, that when you come to the International Court of Criminal Justice in The Hague, you see Charles Taylor being convicted as a war criminal. But the man behind, the man who armed Charles Taylor, the man who trained him as a CIA agent, they are in the background. Nobody talks to them. Nobody talks about them. And if we are to criticize Charles Taylor, why couldn't we bring George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz and set them at the international court to be tried as war criminals? So, these are the issues that when Africans look at it, and then when Europeans come or Americans come to tell us about human rights, and African young people are saying what is happening. Like, globalization is pretty good because we can read, we can see, we go online and hear what is happening. So when you come and you invade Iraq for their oil, and you are telling us that it's because this guy is a bad guy, he's a bad guy, we know, but he didn't do anything to you. So what are the bad guys? Another perfect example is in Africa, for example. They will come and criticize governments. Pretty good. They have the right to do that. Many African governments, many African leaders are drunkards, I have to say that. But come to think of it, you will see in Nigeria, for example, the government, once the government is elected, the first visit our president pays is to Whitehall, England. Do you know what he goes there to do? To take orders from the British government. Nigeria is supposed to be a sovereign nation, but it all lies on interest. After that, he will go to Washington to meet with the president, and they call it mutual agreement. And then the Nigerian people, over 100 million people are living on $1 a day. 100 million people of 150 million people. So 1% of our population is owning 80% of the wealth. The American government shuts up. They don't say anything because oil is the thing. Okay. But when it comes to Gaddafi, who gave NATO the right to kill Gaddafi? We read the first thing was they were there to protect people from being killed by Gaddafi. That Gaddafi was planning is the word, to kill his own people. The newspapers are there. But today, Assad is killing his own people. What did NATO do? A guy had the intention. You divined an intention on a guy that he's about to kill his own people. Because of that intention, you went in. What is there at stake? It was in the news that Goldman Sachs mismanaged 98 billion euros belonging to the Libyan people. It was in the news that Gaddafi paid 40 million euros to Sarkozy for his elections. Who is talking about that? They are all there to be read. So I am not just making things up. So is it because Goldman Sachs mismanaged the wealth of the Libyan people that the war hawks said, let's get this guy out? So there are so many issues, so many questions that need answers here. So that's why when European human rights activists talk to Africans, many African young people say, hey, come on. This is what is good for the goose should be made good for the gander. That's what we are saying. This hypocrisy should cease if we are to talk about a globalized human rights process. So if you are criticizing me, criticize Saudi Arabia as well, because nobody has a right there at all. Not even Christians don't have a right to build a church in Saudi Arabia. So we want to hear European voices criticizing Saudi Arabia. It's not only when it comes to oil that everybody starts making noise. And that's why the Chinese are not listening to anybody. They come to Africa with the money. Hey, cash, give us the resource. We are not here to tell you about human rights, which is equally another wrong approach. So it is because Africa for 600 years has had this relationship with Europe, which has not profited Africa anything, that Africans are now looking to the Chinese. And this encourages our bad leaders to play Europe off against any other bloc that comes with money. It was the same way during the Cold War. If Mobutu Sese Seko, who was stealing his people blind, could get the support of France and the United States, and they keep him there in power, against his own people, they armed him. He was killing and butchering opposition. Nobody said anything until he was chased out by the rebels led by this dead guy. I don't know his name again. So if these people could be supported, Kabila, if these people could be supported, then when you come to tell Africans, hey, you must respect human rights, they will tell you, we know what CIA did to Patrice Lumumba. We know what the Belgian intelligence did in the Congo. So what are you telling us? So these are the issues that, when we are telling people what to do about human rights, we should make the playing field level for everybody. If we can criticize Charles Taylor and give him 50 years imprisonment, I think George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld should sit on that seat and then be asked questions.
Okay. All right. Okay, please. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the debate. It's getting very much heated. But I just want to start off, I just want to start off one thing. The all fundamental human rights as the International Bill of Rights indicates the soft law of UDHR and the two covenants in 1966, which many countries have signed and ratified to. And then the Vienna Convention of the progress has been made whereby, implementation were being spoken. And now the venue we have at the UN Human Rights Council, which now brought about a new package of hope, which is the universality of rights without selectivity and without, bullying. Because before, why Burundi is on the dock when the United States will never be on the dock? So now you have now periodic review whereby each country, whether it's small or big, is being questioned. Germany, United States, Maldives, Burundi, on equal footing. So that's, again, one avenue where civil society and other stakeholders can be. But again, the package itself, and right to development is one of it. Now we have a special rapporteur on right to food, water, the same way we have special rapporteur on torture, on human rights defenders, on freedom of expression. So both civic and political rights, economic and social cultural rights are being accommodated now. So this gives hope to people like you, academia and all that, to engage in your own national reporting process. And I'm happy that Burundi now, you are preparing to that, and the government will be taking lead. And that's where government makes a pledge. And that's where you are going to hold the government accountable. Because what they have promised to do within those 4 or 5 years, or maybe 3 years gap, and then see to it a progress takes place. Okay, 1, 2. The other fact is that Africa disproportionately has been focusing, a lot of people think, on the ICC. Africa, 33 countries, the largest number in any continent, signed to the ICC, Rome Statute. And all the cases except Sudan, it was referred by African government. Ocampo has never gone there to say that where are the cases. But Africans, because of their inability or unwillingness to protect their own people, have invited the ICC in Kenya. without the ISIS, because Kenyans, they have a chance to come up and have a national mechanism to account for people who have killed thousands of people because of election dispute, who have inundated entire villages of settlement in Central Africa. So Kenyans, Kofi Annan Commission said, well, you have to take the Parliament of Kenya have to enact a national mechanism to make those seats accountable. They couldn't do it. And impunity must be fight for. Hence, where else to go when national laws are either unwilling or unable to prosecute people who committed crimes against humanity? Where to go? And then international commission, because Kenya was signatory to that, have invited, say that please, these 6 people or 8 people now here, you have to take account. What I'm saying is that it's not the luxury of, and this is a very expensive court. Millions of dollars is being now spent on Charles Taylor now is in a luxury place. He could have been actually jailed in Sierra Leone or in Liberia, where, and all these Liberians and Sierra Leoneans have to have been watching and seeing that justice being done and also participating in that process. Is he? No. He have a nice suit. He have a hotel-like room. He watches TV. He comes out into that. So, and it's very expensive. Like now in Rwanda, yesterday we were hearing, the local justice. That's more practical on the ground, and people could see that. Another thing, which again the confusion was during the Mahathir Mohamad and Saddam Hussein, I think that's the period where you were active in, was that people try to separate the universality of rights into components. And that's where the division comes. Some people emphasize that, oh, you are talking about right to journalists. What does it mean? Or right to vote? I'm talking about right to food. I'm talking about right to health. That's right, yeah. So does it sound? Because my first practical political participation I've ever witnessed as a student in New Delhi was a group of Kisans was brought by a BJP, that's a right-wing political party. L.K. Advani and Bajpai in a Rajghat where the Indians celebrate. There was a huge meeting with all of them green. They have a green and yellow, and they were waving. That's a Hindu right-wing political party. And after that speech, before they returned to Haryana and Punjab and surrounding in New Delhi, Communist Party from Calcutta came and said that stay now, change your green to red. We give you, instead of 10 rupee, 20 rupee, instead of 1 liter of milk, 2 liter of milk, 2 more days, come here, sleep here. And the green changed it to red. And another extreme speech has been made. So it means political liberty without economic equality and dignity, human dignity, is merely a myth. It cannot be tangible. So we have to insist, as a young activist here, of universalness and indivisibility of rights. Both economic and social cultural rights and civic and political rights are, both of them are important. Like in Rwanda now, he tries to separate. He says that there's no civic and political rights here, no participation. But I'm trying to implement economic and social rights and cultural rights, education rights. I don't think it will be sustainable, because if you only try to one part of you to grow without others, allowing to grow, it means, this part, when it gets stalled, it will collapse because the other part will pull it down. That's in a sense human rights. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add something, or should we? Yeah, well, only if you want, and then we'll give a European voice maybe as a response. Or?
Yes, what I can say is, as I see young people here, I could, relating to human rights, development as an inalienable human rights, what I can say is that the new generation must work on human rights correctly, because what we see now, human rights is linking with interests. There is no human rights. This is a matter of interest. An example I can say is that one country can come in my country and say, okay, we want to give you funds, but we want you to do this. What? I say, we want you to do this, but I tell them, but we don't need that. What we need that people may know their rights, or people may develop, or may go to school, and say, no, you do that, or I go back with my money. What is this? So I say, really, you are not, you don't want to help me. You want to help you by me. You want to help you, but you pass by me. So what I say, this concept of human rights, we, the new generation, let us work in it and help really the populations, not coming with our own interests. And you come in my country, you want to serve your interests, but you want me to work on that, and you tell to the world that you are helping human rights in my country. So what I can say is that we may work differently, not helping people to do what you want. No, let them develop themselves. Let them people know their rights. Let them develop economically, have right to food, have right to jobs, have right to education, but not serving your own interests. That's what I can say.
Thank you. Professor Mkia.
The question of the protection of human rights, or the notion of human rights itself, is a universal one. It's one that is not only acceptable, but a question of quality of life for all human beings. But the problem is their interpretation and implementation. There lies the problem. And here you have, it has to do with human nature, with different stages of development. You have double standards, necessarily, in a way. And what we have to try to do, and we do and try to do it since decades, is to overcome, step by step, these double standards. One is that the bigger guy gets more easily away with the violation than the smaller guy. Well, we Germans have learned our lesson in that regard too, after 45.
You're right.
We had a Nuremberg tribunal,
Yes.
the kind of predecessor of this new international court. But that was one imposed by the winners. Now, the crimes that were tried really deserved to be tried. But who was among the judges? Criminals that were as bad and had killed as many millions as the Nazis, namely the Soviets. Yeah. So the whole thing, from a German point of view, was a sham. So now, I remember when we joined the UN, I made a speech on war criminals which brought the following result. No Western colleague after the speech congratulated me. No colleague from the Eastern Bloc congratulated me. But the third world stood in long line to shake my hands. Why? Because I said, let's get away with double standards, let's create an international tribunal. It was in 73. And now we have this tribunal. It's not perfect, but it is, let's put it this way, a step in the right direction of universal criteria applied to all of us, regardless of whether we are big or small. And then there's another element which comes more and more to the forefront that also gives me hope. It's not only the communication of revolution, which makes violations, clandestine violations, more difficult. It's also that we more and more also in the developed world, because of this shrinking globalized world, we realize that without development, you can't promote civil rights. I mean, we in principle agreed on that already in the UN, but it never was really followed up in substance enough. Now we know that it's much easier to observe in luxury the civil right than when you are in poverty, because there is a question of survival that comes first. Now we learned it from you, the hard way, kind of. And this is why I think in connection with globalization, also development will become more and more to the fore, and through development, it will also become easier to observe civil rights, basic civil rights, because when you are hungry, how can you observe civil rights? But when you are more or less well-fed, you can turn to the next priority, which is human dignity in the sense of equal treatment, no double standards, so on. As long as you are in poverty, number one is how to survive as an issue. So now this is why we maybe should now turn to the other basic law, which is the right to development, because it is intimately connected. I think originally it was the idea of the third world, but now even the developed world has understood this connection, because it is also in our interest. We need stability in the shrinking world everywhere. And so, if we don't help, there will be instability, and that will affect us in return. We are all more or less now in this shrinking world in the same boat. And this is the importance of globalization for the observation of human rights, but also for development. I think these three developments are interconnected and will give us a better chance, again, realistically, in a step-by-step process, with again, more double standards still continuing, and your disappointment. You will still have many occasions to give your passionate speeches on the subject, because it will take time. But in a step-by-step process, I think in this interconnected world, globalized world, which is no longer bipolar, but is now, everybody is also, as far as the bigger powers is concerned, on more equal footing. It is interesting. It comes not only from below that we are more equalizing, it also comes from above. So I think we have there our chances, and we have to use them, and this is why I've come here. I think it was a great idea to bring this theme up, and we will have many occasions to complain that it's not going fast enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on that optimistic note, I'd like to now give the microphone to you, to the participants, to the young leaders, and to the speakers, to offer your comments as well as your questions for the panel and also for each other. I see the first hand already over here, Professor Malafide.
Well, Mr. Ambassador is very optimistic about globalization and human rights. And he has reasons to do so, and I agree with what he said. But on the other hand, when you talk about indeed globalization, meaning first of all the opportunities for communication and for indeed bringing to the light, to the fore, all kinds of problems with human rights, ways human rights are really inflicted on, you are right, of course. You can't hide those criminal acts anymore in the way you could before. But the drama is, in my view, that indeed we know about it, but we are indifferent, too much indifferent about it. We know about what's happening, and we have the information, but what I see is that generally, indeed, there is no real commotion coming from Western Europe, for example, on what is happening with human rights in Russia, what is happening with human rights in Africa, and so on. So we are not really making the difference as we should. So we have a responsibility as human beings. Of course, countries have a responsibility to protect, but also human beings have a responsibility to really care about what's happening. And if we talk about human rights in general, then I don't think that we have sufficient legal instruments to really go for a real protection of human beings. If you talk about justice in protection of human rights, okay, you talk first of all about individual human rights, but this doesn't bring you very far. We see that very clearly in Europe with the Council of Europe, for example. Council of Europe can't really change the policies of countries. Justice in Africa is progressing, but it doesn't really change the injustice coming from the economic situation and the exploitation of people, the fact that power is relying on economic might. And we have names for that in the rights discussion, and we should bring them in. Those are, for example, we talk about patrimonial rights. Patrimonial rights are rights where power is really based on an economic basis, you know. And you can't deny that and just talk about individual right to be protected and so on. No, if you look at the mass violations of women, for example, in Africa, it is to be connected with the patrimonial rights of the leaders there who keep in power and who are acting in such way to use mass violations of women as an instrument, as a weapon in a situation of conflict and war. So human rights can even become that perverse, in my view, to be a legitimation, protection of human rights as a legitimation for behavior of people who are in power to keep on really not protecting human rights and not giving the opportunity to the majority of the population to have their human rights really realized. So I think that we need new concepts, that we need that idea of patrimonial rights, for example, of collective rights, besides individual rights, in order to really bring justice in societies, justice for all and not just of a small group of people who abuse human rights protection as a way to legitimate their power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to make a comment or a question next? I want to keep it in the back, please.
Hello. There's a lot of terminology and a lot of words that we're throwing around and not really thinking about the value judgments that are behind them, i.e. what is development, what are you developing, for who, for not for who, and why. Okay, and I think also I just want to mention the anti-globalization movement that is happening against the neoliberal agenda. One of the reasons why this is happening is because the neoliberal agenda is putting a focus on measurement. But for example, the measurement for poverty is all quantitative. Poverty is a social problem. It's gender relations, it's social relations, it's power structures, it's a social problem. And there's no qualitative research on poverty. And this is one of the reasons why the system of measurement is able to be manipulated. Anyone who's read social science, Pierre Bourdieu says, social relations are the bedrock of inequalities. And I think it's very important, if you're talking about human rights, that you need to address the power structure. You need to address the social systems, the social relations that are happening that are putting these people in these positions. And for that to be done in, like I said, case-sensitive contexts. Because human rights is something that came out of European history, out of the world wars, which is probably one of the reasons why it sits so highly in the European Union. But human rights problems, I'm not an expert on Burundi, but a lot of what you were saying was, the poverty, the access to income, all these sort of things, which are really, problems within that society, that addressing it as a human rights problem really isolates it from taking a more holistic approach to the society. And I think maybe one thing that cultural diplomacy can do is try to give a more holistic approach, and to represent these issues. For example, for people to come in with their own agendas and saying, actually, in this context, in this circumstance, it's coming out of this relations, this power structure, and we need to address that. The people within our society are the ones who can transform that. And so I just think it's very important to focus on the social relations that are actually persisting these things. And when you address communities in a social way, no culture is above another culture. And so everyone, the playing field will be equal. And I think in that way, we can address it in a way that's more effective.
Thank you. Next, who would like to add something? Questions or comments? And again, we really want to hear your voices, so don't be shy. One in the back. Hold on a second. There we go.
Yeah, so I have actually two questions. First, when I look at the topic, human rights as an integral part of the process of globalization, the right to development as an inalienable human right. There have been a lot about peace commissions, human rights commissions, but to me it looks as if people who have to listen to this are not listening actually. And this, I mean leaders. If today we are talking about human rights, that means the human right, it is not respected. And people who are supposed to enforce respect to human rights, they are the government. But now, my question to the presenter of this morning, what is your relationship between the government and you, even though you are independent, looking at the challenges of human rights in Burundi? How can you eradicate the whole problem of impunity, of pulling apart the right to people? If I look at what is said on the net, since May, the 2nd May, there was an article on the human right. On the 4th May, another article, Burundi effort to block a report about political killings. And 28th of May, another article. Now, what does it mean to you looking at after 2 or 3 days an article, after 2 or 3 days an article? So does it mean that this commission is doing so well so that people can talk about it all the time? Or does it mean that there are many challenges which you are facing? You are right, a commission, but you are not given enough tools to maneuver your vehicle. And the last question to that, and maybe to everyone, when we talk of human rights, why can't we think of the cause of people talking about human rights? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Would you like to respond? Or? Yes, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I am so very much enamored by the brilliant contributions here. Your Excellency, your intervention was perfect. Not you, sorry, you. Yeah, I was enamored by your experience and your optimism and the way you delivered it, because it was experience talking. He has seen it all at all levels of international negotiations, and there the dirty job is done. So anybody who has seen it knows. I have been in some of these too, but the issue lies in the fact that one, like cultural diplomacy. Diplomats don't learn so many ways not to say anything. That is the major problem. So they will know 20 ways to say something that doesn't actually mean what they want to say. So that apart, the fundamental problem with the human rights when we are discussing globally, you made a very important point. The point is, from the history of the Magna Charta to the promulgation of the United Nations 1948 Charter on Human Rights, we will see that Europe had a history. Europe became peaceful recently. The Europeans have been very busy killing each other for so many centuries. We know about the 30-year war in Germany that left the population from 18 million people to 4 million. We knew about wars, the First World War. We knew about the Second World War, in which over 50 million people lost their lives. So Europe has seen it all. And that history enabled them, together with winners, the major powers, to sit down and say, hey, come on, let us find peaceful solutions to these problems. We will create a United Nations. The Arab League has, the League of Nations failed to prevent the Second World War because of the inherent injustices built into it, which made the Germans pretty angry and which led to the emergence of Hitler to address German anger and all the crimes he committed in that process. So the Europeans, history taught them a lesson and they learned it. But my problem with so many other parts of the world, I am not kind at all with African governments. Like I always say that many of those who are governing in Africa, in many African countries, are not even fit to be blacksmiths, let alone anything. But they are sitting on atop nations as governors and leaders. And I can't even understand it. I gave an instance yesterday of a guy from Togo, Nasimbe Eyadema. His father was a dictator for many years. And when his father died, the military came together, patched him up, put him in power. He came to Berlin to speak to the members of parliament. He couldn't articulate himself well. I wonder if the Germans say, sell your country to us, this guy would have rightly sold his country there and then. Because we need intelligent leadership across so many spectrums in Africa. And that leads me to what I wanted to say about the beautiful point the professor made. The beautiful point is, yeah, there are human rights violations everywhere. Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent of 54 countries. So we have diverse issues. Women's rights are not superlatively violated in Africa. We have specific places. I have the data and the statistics. In Congo, yeah, we have issues of rape. We call that human rights violation. And sometimes when some Africans are listening to it, they will think, hey, these Europeans don't know anything. Because if you listen to the European media, we see kids are being raped and killed in Germany too, in Europe too. We don't call that human rights violations. Why? Thank you. Extremely rare. In so many other cases, it's equally rare in Africa. So, for example, in the streets of Nigeria, you will not hear about women being raped. But you will hear that in Congo because Congo is in a special war situation where so many foreign powers are there exercising their might over coltan and arming various rebel groups. And these are business interests. It rolls down to interest. So, equally, when we talk about human rights violations, what do you talk about the African Americans in the United States of America today? If a policeman, whenever I'm driving in the streets in America, anytime, my friends will warn me, if the police stop, just show your hand. Show your hand. Because these guys could beat the shit out of you without anybody doing anything. It happens daily. It's caught on video. Do we call that human rights violation? No, we call that crimes. So most of these things we call are crimes that the state is empowered to address. And that leads me to what the question you addressed. The state is empowered to address crimes. But in Africa, when governments commit crimes themselves, they appoint commissions to investigate it. That's what they do. A commission is appointed by African governments when they don't want to do anything about the problem. And when they call it independent, forget it. You are not independent. They are the ones funding you. Whoever pays the piper dictates the tune. So there is, for example, in Nigeria, there was this Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, which was appointed to prosecute financial crimes. We had a guy who stole 185,000 naira. That is about 20,000 euros, and the guy was sentenced to life imprisonment. But we had a commissioner of police who stole 100 million euros, and he got 6 months in jail. 6 months. Just that was a holiday. And they didn't ask him to refund the money he stole. He stole in dollars. Police funds, 100 million. Many European millionaires don't have that kind of money in their bank accounts. But a guy stole 20,000 euros, you sentence him to life imprisonment. And another guy stole 100 million. You give him 6 months in jail to go and relax and get ready for more heist. You know, that's just what it is. And you could see this across so many countries in Africa that whenever you look at it, you feel like, you know, I am not a violent person, but sometimes I feel like punching a leader in the face. The guy ruling Nigeria at the moment, Goodluck Jonathan, sometimes he appears clueless. Nigeria is being robbed of 140 billion euros every year. Our oil is being stolen. Yet, Nigerians are living on less than $1 a day. What are they doing? Nothing. Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, all these major oil companies. Oil bunkering is going on in the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta is an ecological wasteland. In the next 250,000 years, according to scientific reports, the rains there will be acidic rains because oil and gas are being flared every day by these companies. They wouldn't do that in Europe. When European multinationals or American multinationals want to commit a crime, they go to the third world. They don't do it because the laws here are strict. Siemens was very busy bribing Nigerian officials. They wouldn't bribe German. If they do, they will face the law. But in Africa, they will come and they will bribe the police. Hey, come on, it's the way business is done. And that's the issue why sometimes I question, could business ever be ethical while we maintain one standard in Europe and we go to other countries where the laws are not so very strict and we encourage the breaking of those laws that we should be holding. So the issue is, what should cultural diplomats do? What are we intended to do? How do we contribute our voices, our knowledge towards actually confronting those problems wherever we find them? There is a lot we can do. I don't have the answers. That's why I'm throwing the question open to everybody. What do we do to confront the problems?
Okay. Would anyone that would like to give an answer or a response? I see a number of hands. Actually, ladies first. We'll start you. We're waiting, and then we'll go. Okay.
Just
so actually more ladies, but that's all right.
To answer to the questions addressed to me. My friend here said that the commission is no different from with other commissions. He's saying you are not independent. You are the funds are coming from the government. But what I can say is that we are different from, in my country we have many commissions. We have commissions that have been investigated the crimes that happened according to the elections and other commissions. But ours is different. Why? Why is it different? Because I told you that we have a mechanism of control, a UN mechanism of control. So if the mechanism, the UN mechanism control sees that you are not independent, how? If you have not funds, if you are not elected, because all other commissions, they are nominated. The president say, okay, I need 5 people who will investigate, a commission of 5 people who will investigate that crimes. But for us, it's not like that. We are elected by the parliament. And the parliament, they are members of the opposition and members of the governing party. So they have to go to make together a decision. And the member of opposition or civil society, you can't bring someone that they don't want. They say, no, we are not agreeing with that. So they have to be very careful. We have members of civil society who must approve the members of our commission. So we have all the guarantees to be independent. And if the government doesn't give us enough funds, you know, our countries, I'm sorry to say that, our countries are functioning by the Western. They have like 80% of their funds are coming from Europe or US. If you are not giving funds to the commission, they will say, okay, we are not giving you funds also. How will you do? How will you pay the salary of workers? So they have to make all possible so that we might be an independent commission. So the relationship between the commission and the government. You know, the definition of a human violation is a violation committed by an agent of government. If, for instance, in my country, if two people, there are people that are killing each other because of land, members of the same family, because we are too many and the lands are few, is why we are pushing the government to make a political of limiting birth giving. We want, because a Burundian family may have 6 children, 7 children, that's too much. We have to reduce that. So if one Burundian kill another because of land, this is not, it is a killing, but the origin definition of human rights violation is a crime committed by a government agent. So our relationship with the government is that if policemen or people from intelligence services, if he tortures someone, it is for the government to punish. We call the man, we call the victim, we call his boss. It is an agent of government. We say, okay, this man, you must punish him. We can't work, in another word, we can't work without the government. We can't, because there are people who are violating human rights. So we have to bring the government to be involved enough to punish those people. This is our relationship. We are always on the table together. We say, hey, this is not good. You must punish that man, even if he's a chief or whatever. But we make sure that he will be punished. This is our relationship. But we have many challenges also, I can tell you.
Thank you very much. I think when the commission was established in Burundi, we were the first group to visit the commission before even you got sworn in. But the commission of Burundi also have history behind that. The country just emerged from devastating armed conflict and civil discord. And the only venue to monitor human rights in Burundi for some time was through the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Burundi, or what they call IE, special independent expert on the situation. So the independent expert was created by the UN Human Rights Council, and he was not reporting at all, simply because Burundian government never wanted the expert to open his mouth periodically like any other expert at the UN Human Rights Council when there's a session. So civil society and global human rights organizations were putting a lot of pressure that to be changed. So when change took place, and he reported only one time, the condition was, in order to remove this country mandate, because most of the African governments now, country mandates are not enthusiastic. Congo, Burundi, every country now says that we don't want country mandate because other continents, there's no much country mandate. Why only on Africa? So now it become very unpopular, but the condition was you must have mechanism to monitor this. So the commission came, and the commission was founded on the principles of Paris Principle, which means the independence of the commission must be seen through periodically reporting to the first of all coming as a bill through the parliament, and the parliament funding. The government have a responsibility to assist the commission to do their work. And the commission, as you were seeing the report, they publicly criticize the government, and they have a quasi-judicial jurisdictions in order rendering. But you cannot expect the commission now to render that because it's only 1 year in operation. Have you reported yet to the parliament? In July. So it means they haven't even produced their first report to the parliament, because they have to report to the parliament, and their report must be debated by the parliament. Both opposition, government, media have to highlight. So they have it's an important step toward that, and that efficiency can be measured like now in Uganda, in Kenya, and I think we'll be following those steps, because those commissions have really distinguished themselves globally. Mine Kiai left very good, and also Madam Margaret Sekach also did in Uganda very good, best practice, and that I think could be shared. I just want to underline one thing. The problem, and I agree with you, the problem here is not of quantifying what's happening. The problem is political will to act to stop that. We all know that if even you fail, Human Rights Watch goes there and reports. Amnesty International goes there and reports. We go there, we report. So it's not because of knowing what's happening in this global context. It's the will, political will to observe. George Bush, when he was in Tanzania, he was visiting in Ethiopia. Amnesty International was calling him his arrest. Could we arrest? Can you think George W. Bush could be arrested in Africa? Yeah? No, exactly. The answer is not by who exactly. So so American exceptionalism is the things which we are going to live with. But one thing I like in the United States is that he has been replaced, the opposite person, like Obama could replace a Bush in a periodic time. So if the Americans can make sometimes a mistake, they have an opportunity to rectify that. But some of the African countries, we don't have that opportunity. If we make a mistake, we can't rectify for 20 or 40 or 50 years. Still, the things is happening at the same time. So I think it takes other things other than here discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We're technically out of time, but there were a few more hands, so I want to give you a chance to make some brief comments. And then I would ask maybe, as a close advisor of the ICD, Ambassador von Kyaw, could you offer a few maybe concluding remarks to wrap things up at the end? I will. But first I want to take a few questions from here, and then at the end. So first, I think you were waiting patiently here first, and then in the back, and then we'll come to Darnell, please.
Hi. There were a number of things that I agreed with and disagreed with, and now I've kind of lost track a little bit. But one of the things was, like, Franklyne, you said that, George Bush will never be arrested for war crimes, but the ICC will, goes after all these African leaders. But meanwhile, crimes that go unpunished in Africa go punished in Europe. And, I think, basically, there's a lot of different, power dynamics going on there. And there's a lot of different, contexts. And the term interests keeps coming up, and everyone has these interests, and why can't everyone just be a benevolent leader and come in and help other people? And I feel like that's not a realistic expectation to have. And that what we maybe should be more looking at is sort of more multilateral forums where people who have organizations, states that have different interests should be working together more. An example is with the sort of this anti-globalization movement issue came up, and with the specific example of sweatshops and labor human rights violations. There's quite a big movement to get labor unions and multinational corporations and states to sort of sit down together and form solutions together, and because they do have interests, and those interests aren't going to go away. But globalization, it isn't all just about increased communication and good things. It's a lot of it is the driving factor behind globalization, in my perception, is increased trade flows and decreased trade barriers, and that means that governments are less able to protect their citizens, and human rights violations are able to happen more easily because people have less protection. So what is needed is I think a more sort of multilateral, more organizations and governments and things working together, because in the current situation, states don't have the same sovereignty that they had, and that basically we just need more collaboration, I think.
Thank you. And I saw there was a hand in the back. I'm not sure. Did someone want to ask a question or comments over here? No? If not, then going in order, Darnell, and then we'll come back to, okay. All right.
I'll yield to her.
Ladies first, all right, okay. And then we'll go back.
That's actually quite directly also to what you just said. I think this idea that globalization makes citizens more vulnerable potentially also leads us to ask questions about society itself, and you talked about social relations, and now there's a well-known idea in social psychology that groups that feel less protected also feel more threatened from other groups. And I think that's a very important issue to keep in mind also when we're looking at the idea of human rights and the idea of globalization, because globalization does ask the question, how do we as societies on the ground and social groups within those societies feel about the idea of globalization? Does it give us images, and we're talking about communication flows, do we communicate images of threat, or do we communicate images of togetherness and sharedness and positive elements? And I think as the question that keeps coming up for me as a person just at the threshold to my entire career and work life, so as a young person in the audience is also in this triangle. I keep having the sensation of absolute frustration when we come to the topic of interest, and absolute hope and desire and passion to do something, and then there's this shift back and forth, and I think some of us talked about this also as well before. Now I feel there's this triangle, and I don't have an answer, and it's probably more of a rhetoric question, but between those interests of states and government that are also guiding governments, and I think this is also something that's very opaque from a young person's perspective. I have no idea which lobby is doing what to what government, and whose interests are being is so untransparent that it really brings up this frustration and almost feeling of powerlessness, because what can we really do if it's really about this? With all the goodwill inside, how far can we even get? And how can we foster cultural diplomacy also within social groups, within communities? How can we talk about understanding and ability to respect and ability to listen if we're talking about a United States of America who just seem not to be, where certain emotions come up within societies and social groups, negative images, but we want to also try and have a good relationship with them. So how do we do this? How do we bring to certain countries who are so dominated by these interests? How do we make the small person still not feel antagonistic against those countries? It's a back and forth. How do we make Americans not feel superior about smaller countries when the communication within that country is so about dominance or strength and us, because now we need messages of us in this globalizing world, and it just keeps circling around. And how can we, in this context, just stick to our ideas of human rights and doing something good, being engaged and being proactive?
Maybe if I could offer a brief response to that, since it was sort of a cultural diplomacy question. I think that's exactly the kind of an opportunity where cultural diplomacy, I think, can assist. But it's more in the framework of what I was discussing, as I call it new school cultural diplomacy. And there I can quote the foreign minister of Mozambique, who was here recently, who told us a story, basically breaking down, boils to this. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, in the sense we need to listen more. And he was underlining how important that is to diplomacy as a whole. And I would argue it's of crucial importance to cultural diplomacy. So if one could have a situation where one gets the big guy and the small guy, to take language from before, together, and first of all have that listening, in the sense if we can try to create a space maybe a nonprofit place, non-governmental place such as the SCD, where at least for a moment we can forget everything that we think we know about the other person, put it aside, and try just to listen, to have a dialogue. First of all, in order to do that, we have to accept the fact that we all discriminate, including me, including all of us. And I think we may not like to accept that fact, but the point is we are products of our environment. Whether we like it or not, we see the world through our eyes, and that's been influenced by many things. So I think first of all, it takes a certain humility to realize our own imperfection. Even if I have my PhD in a certain country, that doesn't mean I understand that country. Even if I spent my whole life in a country, that also doesn't mean that I understand that country. So I think that's the first step. If one can try, and it's difficult, but if one can try to have that moment where both sides, there is a certain humility there, recognizing the imperfection on both sides. Secondly, if one can then come to the point where it's more about listening than speaking, just that we listen, what are the concerns, what are the challenges, what are the wishes, what are the needs of both parties. Then one can come, hopefully, to cultural diplomacy, where one can have a dialogue, which over time, hopefully, can lead to an understanding and trust. You're always going to have the problem that the big guy is going to be the big guy, and the small guy is the small guy. So it doesn't necessarily solve that issue. But I think it's at least the first step to at least get that dialogue going on. And if it's respectful, if it's humble on both sides, that's a start. And obviously, it's up to the politicians and the governments and the private sector companies to help us with the agendas and this and that. And there are some things that we can't avoid. Hard power is always going to be there. Money is always going to, unfortunately, be central of importance to everyone. So I'm not really giving you an answer in terms of how we solve these issues. But I think that's a small role that cultural diplomacy can play, at least to allow for that dialogue to take place. Because I think if there's no dialogue, there's no chance. If there's a dialogue, there's at least a chance. I'm aware of the fact, though, that A, B, C, and D still have to happen. And an apple is still going to be an apple, and an orange is still going to be an orange. And you're not going to get rid of the agendas, and you're not going to get rid of those factors. But I think that is a space where cultural diplomacy can at least help or offer a contribution. But did you want to respond? I don't know where the microphone is. Oops, or did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's a little bit my problem. So
Yeah.
we're sitting here, young leaders, we're confronted with, I was here a while ago when Mr.
Michael Chertoff,
was talking. And the
former
problem
Secretary
is
of Homeland Security under Bush, very prominent Republican, really a hard power guy. Anyways, but yeah.
So we're sitting here and we're having the opportunity to meet him, and we're very honored about this because we are actually in this situation of small people meeting big guy. And we're making comments, so we're trying to actually engage in a cultural diplomatic way with each other. But we're getting nothing. We don't get this two-way situation. We're getting to hear there's no torture in the United States. And suddenly the responses from the audience get emotional, and suddenly the defense is getting even colder. And suddenly we're finding ourselves in a young, emotional student versus hard-boiled, cold politician situation again.
Unfortunately, that happens every day, right?
And
I
that
think,
happens
yeah.
every day, again.
And so I'm not saying you're going to be successful every time, but one has to try. And unfortunately, that's frustrating for us as cultural diplomats too, because you can bring exactly the people in the room that you want to bring in the room, but that doesn't guarantee anything's going to happen. So
I just want to say 1 minute, because I'll try to answer that on Monday morning. Okay. About the hope. You know, any time in this world, as long as humans are there, there's a new path of aspirations people want to reach. No country or no society could ever say that now we have had all the rights and privileges and freedoms we need to. Most of the time there's one struggle after another which comes out. That's a human life. And I'll bring out on Monday a hope where activists coming from Somalia, whose name tag is Muslim, in a context of 9/11, is starting a protection program for human rights defenders on certain part of Africa and making a headway. So you guys, you will have them see models whereby you can still become a diplomat and don't be intimidated by people who are walking, on jackbox and, becoming like Putin, Bush and all that. All this, and America, for that reason, America is, what's America? You throw one issue up for America, there's a half for and half against. There's no unanimity in America at all. The debate is very, very tough even there. Those leaders now we are mentioning, they don't take a cup of tea and then leave it. In public platform, they are being ripped off. The same way now we are talking about here. And so they have to respond. And then not only that, young people like you mobilize and they throw them out. They completely throw them out. and bring new, fresh things. So those opportunities also may exist. Maybe some of you could not agree with me, but I see democracy is the worst form of government. I think Judge said one time. But but it's the only things now on the plate. That's where you can at least correct something. And so let's strive, and I'll try to answer some of the questions. I promise that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at 15 minutes over time, but let's take Darnell very brief, Franklyne very brief, and then very brief concluding remarks, and we'll have the rest of the afternoon, but if we go too late now, then I don't think we'll catch up later. So,
I have a litany of things to say, but I won't. I'll keep it very brief. Your Excellency, you took my breath away when you were talking about the Nuremberg trials, and you talked about the murderers, and you mentioned the Soviet Union. We must keep in mind that the victorious powers, the Allied powers, were all colonial states, all of them, with dominion over hundreds of millions of people, with all of the crimes that go along with that. It's something, and I don't say that to put you on Front Street, I'm just merely trying to bring some clarity to some historical facts here. And it's actually, it is a fact that is kind of like swept under the rug. When they talk about, the Allies, we won. And point in fact, Ho Chi Minh, after the war, after VJ Day, excuse me, he asked the Americans and the French, look, we helped subdue the Japanese. We won our freedom. What did they do? They went right back into French Indochina. And years later, my ass was there on the ground, because of their inability to do the right thing. The two things. After the war, the United States, its security services, the CIA, recruited Gestapo and SS into their ranks. I've been trying to work that over in my head. What does that mean? How did that flow influence public and foreign policy in the years thereafter, even to this day? These are facts that cannot be refuted because they reported it in the German press, the Spiegel, Stand, and then suddenly it was gone. One of the biggest war criminals, Werner von Braun, went on to lead NASA. So we shouldn't fool ourselves about German complicity in a lot of crimes. I want to say something about Charles Taylor. 1481, the Portuguese were the first to introduce themselves into what we now know as Liberia. Years later, the slavocracy in America would introduce privileged blacks, quote unquote, into that area to establish a new country, Liberia. It's amazing how people can understand some of the things that have gone down in Liberia since then, since the establishment of Liberia, and not understand its history and from whence it came. I think Cicero once said, those who do not know history are destined to remain a child. And it's very true. We have to, our understanding has to be grounded in our understanding of history. Now, history can be a very fickle thing. One person can say one thing and another person can say another. But I think out of that, we can have an objective appreciation of history, especially if you talk to the victims of it, And I stand up here proudly today to say that I'm one of the victims of that. I look at my African brothers here, and I can't explain to you how it feels to look at them and maybe say, that's my cousin. Or maybe my forefather spoke the same language, and I don't know anything. I cannot explain it to you. It's a feeling that I don't wish on anyone. Now, back to Charles Taylor, and I'm going to round it up right here, wind it up. This man has been given 50 years in prison for crimes that other people should be charged with. Who gave him the guns? Who promoted him? Who is it? Now, someone said about something about George Bush and all the rest of them. I assure you that there are people in America who want and will bring these people to justice at some point. Believe that. Believe me when I say that. And there's a hypocrisy out here. And once again, Your Excellency, you were in the government when Germany was involved deeply in the Vietnam War. There's a thing that I used to say in a lot of speeches. Deutschland ist ein US-Flugzeugträger. Without German complicity in those wars, they never could have been prosecuted, or it would have been very difficult. I know I was a member of the 540,000 troops that were stationed here in Germany under the worst conditions, under the most racist conditions you could imagine. We can discuss that. And also a soldier on the ground in Vietnam. And there were German soldiers there in Vietnam, but that's another story. And there are also German soldiers who wear American uniforms to get experience, combat experience, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. If anyone doubts that, talk to me.
Okay, thank you, Darnell. I think, Franz, you were next. Yeah? And then,
the point is, all these things are known, but I don't just want to spoil the beautiful ending that Darnell just made. That's why I wouldn't go into that. In another forum, maybe you need to organize another conference on these themes. Yeah.
That's it.
I wanted to react to what the young woman said about the power dynamics, and as a response to that we need more multilateralism. It is good. It's a great aspiration. But we have multilateral organizations all the while. United Nations, various councils of the UNO, at the regional level, European, African. But even in those multilateral settings, the power dynamics will always be there. They will never be absent. Look at what is happening. When America doesn't like what a country is going to say, they pull themselves and their allies out. And without that kind of support, you are not getting nowhere. So the big guys, like they say, will always be big. But the point is, power is never benevolent. There is no power that comes there for you. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If a great nation doesn't have checks and balances from other nations as well, or within itself, it will always act like a big elephant in a china shop. That's the way it is. That's what we've seen in history. Rome was an empire. Rome colonized the then known world. Rome was a big elephant in the room. Rome was subjugating, killing, and massacring people, plundering cultures. The Spaniards came, went to Latin America, did the same. We are seeing that when what America is doing today in Afghanistan, all these places. I grew up in America. This is a country I love so very much. Okay, but the facts of history are there. And Darnell makes a very important point. There was a book I was reading, I've forgotten the title. He says the victims of history never forget it. They don't. But people who, that's why when you come to, my friend went to, she was in the States, and she met a Mexican or a Guatemalan. I just said, your people destroyed my people. And my friend was saying, hey, I don't know shit about it. I'm from Spain. Doesn't mean. But these victims of history, look at the Jews. They keep on handing it over. Even from the biblical times. They say, teach this to your kids. What happened to us? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. And they kept on handing this history because they were victims down to generations yet to come. And that is what happened. This is what a lot of people don't understand. When people that come from situations of subjugation talk about it, they can feel it. I wish you guys could read the book, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Go get that document. It's pretty important. And to the point you were raising, I would like you to read a book. It's called Fair Future, about anti-globalization movement. It will really help you a lot. We don't need to go back to anti-globalization. It's a process that is going. It will continue going. And another book I will just throw out here that everybody should go and find out is Naomi Klein. She wrote The Shock Doctrine. It's a pretty important document. See what powers do when they have power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. So Ambassador von Kyaw, I want to give you the challenge to try to offer some concluding remarks, and ideally if you can be as optimistic as you were before, it would be even better. But it was a huge panel discussion with many different topics, but please.
You're giving me an impossible job, and if I'd known it before, I would not have come.
Okay.
Sitting here, I feel awkward not to be an American, because nobody has criticized any country more than you, America. That's an indirect compliment. Apparently America counts and nobody else. Nobody has criticized China. Nobody has criticized Russia here.
We did that yesterday.
Yeah, okay, I wasn't there. But I wonder whether it was as effective as you did today with the United States. I owe to the United States my liberty from Nazism, and I owe to the United States my liberty from communism, Soviet Union. I owe my education, at least as far as I had a scholarship at Chicago U. I obtained it from the United States. And I was a refugee from the East, what is now Poland. And I owe to the United States the reunification of my country. So whatever you talk about the United States for me is irrelevant when it is negative, even though I know that even this promised land is not perfect. And George W. Bush, of course, was the least, but he had one excuse, apart from having lived for too long in Texas. He had this September 11th thing, and this made not only him in the United States kind of mindless, because it was a huge challenge. I mean, we have to be objective also in dealing with the United States. As I have always, as a diplomat, learned to be fair with the developing world, and also due to my stay in Africa, where, as I mentioned, I experienced very extreme cases on the extreme left as well as on the extreme right. And I don't accept that Africa is a hopeless continent with all kinds of generalizing shortcomings. I see there good governance and I see bad governance. So why not bet on the fact that good governance will expand, as it has expanded even after the 30 Years' War and two terrible civil wars, namely the two world wars in Europe. And the fact is that in this context, also human rights play their role. But we should always be also realistic, not only moral indignation and impatience. This is a process, and we have needed in Europe hundreds and hundreds of years, and in between we killed each other in an incredible way. So take time. It goes faster today, and that's a positive signal. Why? Because the world is shrinking, and here we come back to globalization. Nobody can afford to live in the medium term, I'm not talking about a few years, with a bad reputation when it comes to basic human rights. I'm not talking about individual rights in the excessive way. I'm talking about avoiding massive killings and promoting good government so that the whole population can get their advantages and see their prospects. And in this regard, I simply refuse to be only negative. And I can only encourage you to find your way and your place. You can find it in government. You can find it in political parties. You can find it in civil society. There are enough ways of promoting our ideals. And this confusing, sometimes appearing, confusing debate shouldn't hinder you, because you have to look through. You have your basic principles, you believe in human rights, in human dignity, you believe in development, the right of development for all of us, in particular in those who have so far been deprived of it, and we have to fight for more justice in the world. But of course, those who are in difficulty still today need also to help us. For instance, I see no reason to give support to countries with proven bad and corrupt government. I'm willing, and I even insist on giving them to the people, the suffering people, humanitarian aid. But public aid, I would try to give, if possible, as much as feasible, only to those with good governance, so that we don't put our money in a bottomless pit and can help that the money ends where it should go, namely to the people, the masses, and not a certain elite that is thriving and put it somewhere. This, by the way, is a similar thing nowadays in a different context inside the European Union. are so highly developed. Look at what is happening in Greece. This is also the question of how we can make sure that the money we, in the name of solidarity, have to give to our Greek brothers and sisters is not a waste, but is given for good purpose. This is the whole problem of Greece. How to make sure that our help will be meaningful. In a way, Greece is representing the shortcomings of our world. They are here with us in Europe, they are with you in Africa, they are elsewhere. And we are one world, we are, now I'm going to develop into a preacher, but I see no reason of despair. I have been through many disappointments and frustration, but I've always also discovered not only glimmers of hope, but concrete development. This European thing is a miracle. From my point of view, which I experienced 45 and the whole breakdown of everything, it's a miracle. Okay, others maybe will not be fortunate enough to have and see the same kind of miracles in their lifetime, but they can certainly see, with our support, developments that go in that direction. I see no reason why not. Africans are as good when it comes to wishing to live in stable and fair and equal conditions as we do. So why shouldn't we do it together in the spirit of the ACP conventions, which were not always a success, I admit.
Thank you very much, Ambassador von Kyaw. All right, well, on that note, we are over time, so I think we do need to conclude. And we now have a brief lunch break until 2:30. I'd ask you all to please briefly be on time. We have a full afternoon, concluding with a lecture of Norma at 6 o'clock. So it's a full afternoon, so don't be late for the lunch. And we very much look forward to continuing. Before we leave, if you could please offer another round of applause for all of the panelists from the panel, as well as for yourselves, the participants. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. And yeah, and so for the lunch break, just like for yesterday, you have about an hour, and you're free to do anything you like. The best thing now is that we have one more for the video. All right. Okay.